Okay, it is May 25th of 2023, and this will be the perimeter path of Havenwood, the path that runs around essentially the outer circuit of the entire 20 plus acres that I've been working on intensively over the last almost 4 years, off and on over the last 30. And the goal is essentially to have at least one set of videos of all three of the main paths through the land with commentary for me, and then another set of them without, one set in the fall, one set in the spring. So this is the spring set. This will be the walk along the perimeter path with commentary, just kind of generally talking about what I've done and why, and pointing out some interesting things. And then when I finish this walk, I will then turn around and in silence walk it back the opposite direction. So you'll be able to walk it here online whenever you wish, however you wish. So let's go ahead and begin. This is an access road on the land that heads back to kind of a glen where folks used to burn brush. And the path here veers off to the right. Kind of cuts through the glen here. And this glen is really quite beautiful. And this was here. This was not made by me. I did not do any of this. This was done by some heavy machinery about 25 years ago. Really is turned out quite well. It's quite pretty. In case you want a reference point as well as to how a lot of this woods you're about to see looked before I began working on it, it all looked essentially like this, where you could only see like a few feet in, and it was all choked out with young saplings and fallen trees and vines and brambles and thorns and poison ivy. And because what happens is if you ever clear cut land, the earth does its best to heal rapidly, and it does so at least in this biome, in this region of the world, it does so with rapid, crazy growth. And the whole purpose, or one of the purposes of the work that I've done here, is to kind of help nature get to where she ultimately would have gotten 200 to 300 years from now. Repairing the wound that previous landowners here have inflicted a couple of times. It's been clear cut a couple of times. I think it used to be pig farmed, part of it, and you'll see a lot of it was mined for iron ore. So it's been abused over the last 200, 300, 400 years. And so one of the goals of my work here was to kind of help nature recover more fluidly, I guess you could say. This section right here is where I actually started on the project. This was about three and a half years ago. I kind of started right here, clearing land out. This used to be a pig house. There used to be 2 pigs who lived here. They met a tragic end. It was pretty sad, but they were very, very sweet. And no one's lived in there for quite some time, but the dream was one day to steward this place, and then I would have a rescue farmed animals, a handful of farm animals, just enough that there'd be a diversity of them to show people how beautiful they are when people came to visit, if anyone came to visit, but not overpopulate the land. So the goal was to one day repair that and have a rescue pig, or maybe 2 pigs, live there, but you never know. So this path we're on now has just started to really have a good feel to it and just take shape. You know, when you make paths through the woods, you kind of have to go with the land, and sometimes it's a little tricky to figure out where the best flow is. But this is it's coming together. I like all the ferns. You'll see a lot of ferns, and the more I open up the land, I think the more the ferns tend to like it. They're of course partial shade plants, and yet they like sun like everybody else, so they've been coming out in force as I've been clearing. So here's the neighboring land. You can see how kind of thick everything gets and overgrown. Again, this is just mid-spring now, so it'll get a little more dense as the trees and the plants tend to grow during the summer months and expand. And then when I clear, this is one of those, I'm not sure if this is a mining trench here, but it certainly was an erosion gully. It was eroding. And this is what I tend to do with all the brush that I cut and the saplings that I cut when I clear the land, is I fill in these erosion gullies. So this will all melt down over the next 20, 30, 40, 50, 200 years and turn into dirt. And even that erosion ditch out. And in the meantime, of course, before it melts down, animals love it. So animals, when I make these little houses, critter houses, I call them, this would be more of a critter condo, the animals move right in and really, really, really like it. So you regularly on the walk, you'll see those piles of brush, and they're either spaced apart from each other to give the proper distance between them, and or filling in erosion ditches. Yeah, the maintenance of the paths, sometimes I'm asked about that. This path we're on now, I made personally. Most of this red perimeter path I made personally over the years. Several of the paths were here before I started working on them. You're looking at, to keep them looking like this, you need to weed eat them about once a year, and I hit them with the leaf blower about 4 times a year. Mostly, of course, in the fall. But other than that, they pretty much maintain themselves. Of course, regularly, it's good to come through and prune limbs out of the way, so that you want people to be able to walk them freely without having to duck. This is an access road that heads to the northeast corner of the property. And I used to have the walk run right up on the property line, just about 10 feet away, right up there, but it was kind of precarious, and it was only 10 feet away and difficult. It didn't feel right. So this section of the walk is just on this road here. These stumps are on purpose. This is a fatwood experiment. I read that if you cut down pine trees and leave a 3-foot stump, and you do that in the dead of winter, then as the sap rises through the summer, the sap fills these stumps and makes fatwood, which is really, really powerful fire starter. And so anybody who heats with wood, fatwood is a really valuable thing to have. So this is my fatwood experiment. So in about a month and a half, I'll harvest these, and I will cut them into 12-foot rounds, about that far down, and then so that people can then split them and make fatwood out of them. Start their fires. I think it's going to work. I've looked at several of the stumps. It looks like they're filled with resin, so could be pretty cool. And the reason why I cut down pine trees is that when, in this region of the world anyway, when there is a scar that the earth tries to heal from, it seeds quickly growing trees first. So pine trees grow really, really fast. They're really, really heavy. they have relatively shallow root balls, and so they fall over faster. And so they'll grow really fast. They'll fall over in windstorms, and then they'll rot in for the earth to renourish the soil and feed the other trees. That's an oversimplification, but that's generally what pine trees do. And of course, the soil here is already loamy. It's already perfect. It doesn't need enrichment. And, excuse me, that was a fly. And so when the pine trees come in, I've been trying to thin out the pine trees to give more, so that the other trees don't compete for nutrients and water and light as much. They grow better. And then I use those pine chunks to make critter houses and or fill in erosion gullies, or just make kind of piles around their root balls, like right over there. And so that'll melt in and make some nice dirt, and in the meantime as a house for somebody. And so that's why I tend to thin out the pine trees. I don't cut them all down. You want a diversity of species. That's one of the great things about Havenwood, is there is a brilliant diversity of species of trees. Probably 30, I would offhand guess there were 30 main species of tree here. I don't know all of them. I know a lot of them. And there are 2 primary species of pine. And so when a pine tree is really big, like this guy, I tend to let him do what he's going to do. And if he falls over naturally, then I can process him and dice him up and spread him around. But I tend to try to remove the younger pines and or the ones that have already fallen over. So you'll see a lot of stumps around. And most of the stumps you'll see are pines that I've either cut down or have fallen down, that I've then kind of chunked up to move out of the way. And again, all of this, when I first started working on this place, I guess I've been working on and off for 30 years, but over the last 4 is when I've done most of this clearing work of the 20 to 22 acres we're going to be looking at in these videos. I mean, you couldn't see 10 feet in here. It was completely choked out. And now it really is taking shape. This is just basically phase 2, I guess you could call it, of what I'm intending to do, which is now at this point, I will just let it, I would, assuming I will be able to continue working on it, I would basically gradually keep thinning some pine trees, especially on this hill up here. You'll see it's still a little thick. And then, but essentially, when it looks like this, then you just let it go for 5 to 10 years. And then you see which trees, are really booming and happy, and which ones aren't quite as, harmonizing quite as well with their environment, and you can kind of then do a little more thinning. But I wouldn't thin this much, too much more. This is a real boost to quote-unquote Mother Nature, and, when it starts looking like that, you pretty much let her take it from there. Yeah. So this cherry tree is really cool. It's been like this for really quite a few years, and it's shown signs of falling further. I was going to cut this bottom branch off and try to save it a couple of 100 pounds, but I think it's partially supported off another tree on that branch. The only thing that would save this tree, it has a lot of character to it. I'd like to save it, but at some point I'd have to bring like a 6x6 post in and sink it like right here in the ground, about 200 pounds of concrete, and then support it right there, and then it would be able to stay and continue growing. But that's a project for another day. That's not going to happen this year. But it's a thought. It's such a cool tree. And then when I find these cedars, these are cedar logs, and they really love moss, or I guess moss loves them, and they don't rot hardly at all. And this used to be this used to be this was logged for cedar. And so you'll find there's a really beautiful specimen right up here, about to come to it, I'll show you, but these are basically tops from cedar trees that were logged for lumber and or fence posts. And whenever I find these, I would bring them over and kind of help the path, kind of form the path to keep guiding people. You want to have people walk these paths and just flow along almost subconsciously, not have to really wonder where they're going. Here's another example. These are 2 cedar tops that kind of all mossed out, which are kind of neat. So now essentially we're walking the northern edge of the property westward. I believe that's right. So this is the only cedar I've found on the property in its, that fell in its entirety. There are younger cedars that are continuing to grow, but they grow really, really slowly. So there are no large ones like this on the property. But that's a really cool tree. And I guess this one I don't know why they didn't process this one for lumber. I guess it wasn't exactly what they were looking for lumber-wise, but still a really pretty tree. All the moss, and then more moss every year. That's what moss does. These paths eventually, if I could get enough foot traffic on these paths, they will end up getting covered with moss as well. Here's one of my favorite trees, beech tree. It's a really, really cool guy. Nice. Now we're getting to an area that was the most choked out area of the land. I've done a lot of chainsawing up here recently, trying to take out the middle-aged, the 10 to 15-year-old, thinner-trunked pine trees. Starting, back here, all along this ridge. This entire area was essentially impenetrable just a year ago. I just recently got to this area of the land. That was mostly this past year that I worked in here. And this northern edge here on the right coming up, you couldn't see 2 feet in. I mean, it was really, really, I guess it felt like it was suffocating. It's kind of an intuitive word for how it felt, but it's certainly as much freer and more open now. For lack of a better term, happier. And then there's this ravine with a huge gully in it. There's a big gully right here, and how convenient. So then I would just gather all of the brush from all of these trees I cut down, and you make these wonderful houses. And so there are dozens and dozens of animals already living in there, and just happy as all get out. And then over the years, it'll take about 200 years probably, that will turn into a dirt mound, and will stop the erosion there, or at least help lessen the erosion there. And there are collections like that all over. You'll see them all over the place. There's another one right down there we're coming to. And the red dot is there are at different times there's an Airbnb apartment here, and people are told they can walk the paths, and sometimes guests come and walk the paths, and the paths are quite clear now and obvious, and at the same time, you want people to feel comfortable, like they're not going to get lost. So the different paths are color coded, and that's why I put these dots on there, so people can just, if they do feel like they're getting lost, they would just look for the next dot. So that's, if you see the colored dots and wonder, that's what that is. It's just as subtle as possible. It's a walking assistance for anyone who comes to visit. Some more of those mossy cedars I found to keep people from kind of flowing downhill. This is a really, really cool part of the land. This, I don't know what this ground cover is. Someone must have planted, there's a a local cemetery with lots of really old graves in it, right up here to the right. That's what is it? It's kind of a mix between public and private. If you're a resident of this area, it's open to you, but it is still on private land. But it's really a cool cemetery. Maybe I'll make a video about that sometime. But this ground cover here is, I think, kind of flowed down from the cemetery, and it flowers. I think in about a month it's going to flower. I think it is a June flowering ground cover. And of course it's just spreading all down the hill here. So there are times, not too long, not too many weeks of the year, but there's like a chunk of time every year when this is kind of covered in little white flowers. It's very nice. And I went ahead and cut a little path right here. That's the property line right there. And I cut a little path to the road, and you just walk up the road right to the cemetery in case anybody wants to walk to the cemetery. This corner was a mess about 6 months ago. An absolute mess. Trees everywhere, fallen trees everywhere, vines, brambles. And so I came in, pruned it out, then I chainsawed it out, chunked everything up, and then I piled everything on the property line in a little wall, a brush wall that runs about 4 feet tall, all the way down there. And again, that is a house for a bunch of animals, and then at some point that too will turn into an earth berm right on the property line. And as I keep working here, which I will over the years if I'm blessed to be able to, I'll just keep adding to that wall. Here were some very, very old antique beer bottles from some of the guys that were working here. They would sit here and drink their beer. Or maybe it was soda pop, hard to tell. But those bottles have been here at least since I've ever been here, 30 years plus. And when I'm working in here, I'll find bottles like that all over the place. Almost all of them fill with moss, which is really cool. So I just leave them when I find them if they're glass. Here's a cool example of what happens if you really walk a path a lot. This section of the land has been walked quite a bit, and you can see how much the moss propagates. And that's the effect I was kind of going for. So if it could ever be visited by more people, especially in this time of the year, the moss would just spread. This curved path here, which switchbacks down the hillside, we'll cover that in the blue video, the blue path. It's called the Moss Way, kind of uncreatively. I made it back in 2006, but we'll cover that in the blue path video. The red path joins the blue path here for a while and heads in this direction, so we're now on the red and the blue path. And there are two different family of deer who have really taken a liking to what I've done. And they tend to like this ridge. During the, from late morning to early evening, they kind of disappear. So you rarely see them at this time of day. But if we would, they'd be around here somewhere. They let me get really close too when I'm working. It's kind of cool. I won't even know they're there. And then they'll if I get too close, they'll snort. And I'll look up and I'll be like, whoa, 30 feet away, there's 6 deer just staring at me. And sometimes I'll just keep working and they'll just stay right there. It's kind of neat. Here's a little intersection of paths. This is where the red and the blue paths diverge again. This little moss-covered intersection. The Bagua table is what that's called. My brother somehow carried that up. It breaks into 2 pieces, apparently. And he carried that up and put that here many years ago. 25 years ago, maybe? But that's a very nice place to sit. Could be a good place for a campsite. I'll probably just take one tree out right there, and that entire circle would be a really good spot for a tent or a little campsite. But that's not really a priority at the moment. We'll continue on the red path. The blue path continues this way, but we will cover that in another video. And the red path continues this way, the perimeter path. And occasionally you might see, I'll try to find an example to show you up here. You might see a metal post with an orange, spray-painted orange on the top, and I found the pins for the property when I was doing this. They weren't that easy to find, so I then went ahead and staked the perimeter. I don't know if you can see, there's one right there. And so I kind of went along and generally every 50 to 100 feet put in a metal post with a little orange spot on it just to make sure the line was clear. I met the neighbors next door. They have 20 acres next door, also woodlands, and nice people. And I was out one day working on this path here, and he comes flying up this trail here. You can see there's like an access road right here. And he was zooming around on his motocross bike. And he was checking the perimeter of their land, just like I was checking the perimeter of this one. And this path, the red path, used to come right here, and it used to go to the right here. You can actually see how open that looks right there. And then it would go on that road until we meet back up with the road a little later, which I'll show you. And so I flagged the guy down when he's coming on his motorbike, and I'm like, dude, working on a path here, and I think this is... And he says, well, actually, I'm pretty sure this access road is on our property. It was very, very interesting. And so we walked together, real nice fella. And it turns out I was wrong. I indeed was wrong. That I had gone over the edge. And so set the pins in new. And, of course, had to disassemble this path completely and make the one we're on now. This is relatively new. This is about a year old, this path. And it turned out to be a much more beautiful path, actually. It worked out really well. And then as I cleared this section of land out, which was just impenetrable as of a year ago, I cut everything up and I used the detritus to make this wall. So it's only about a foot tall there, but it grows to about 3 feet tall there, and it gets about to its 4 foot desired height all the way down to kind of provide a natural buffer between the motocross path, which they fortunately rarely use, and the peaceful walking path, you see. So as I continue to work up here, I'll keep stacking onto that. Ideally, this wall would be about 6 feet tall, ideally. So that even if someone did come flying by on their motorbike, there wouldn't be any question. They wouldn't come onto this land and disturb somebody walking here. And it would let the walkers, people trying to peacefully walk, feel a little more, I don't know, calm, secure, whatever word you want to use. In fact, as I was building this wall, I ran out of stuff because I didn't want to cut any more pine trees down. And this section right here was really low, and I was thinking, geez, sure would be good to have another tree. What a bummer. And then a storm came, and this pine tree right here, it just twisted this pine tree and just blew the top right out of it, and it fell right over there. So I just chunked it up and put it all on that wall right over there. It worked out perfect. It's quite fortunate. People have asked how many hours I've put into this place, and just in the last 4 years, it's just a guess because I haven't been keeping track, but it has to be getting close to 5,000 man hours to do all of this. Because you go through with your loppers first, and you walk through and you cut out all the saplings and all the vines and all the brambles and all the lower lying limbs, and then you come through with the chainsaw and cut up the fallen pines and cut down the immature pines. And then you have to gather all the bigger chunks and put them into either houses or walls. And then you gather all the smaller brush and put it on top. And those are the phases this work goes in. And then it gets to looking, you know, like this. Like that branch would be picked up, but, you know, it's okay to have your Navajo blanket. You know, apparently the Navajos, when they wove blankets, they intentionally would weave in a mistake to show humility, to remind themselves and everyone else that nothing and no one man-made is perfect. So that branch there will just be my Navajo blanket for this area. That's meant to be a joke. I'm well aware that there's still much to be done. So now we're coming to the apex of another access road. This is a turnaround point for another access road. This is essentially the northwest corner of the property we're coming to now. And we're getting really close to the property line, right? There's the brush wall I was talking about. This pine tree here was really cool. This one fell pretty recently. And of course the wind came and knocked it over and flipped it up. This entire root ball was 90 degrees up in the air, and the tree, you know, fell all the way down to there. And so as I'm chunking it up with the chainsaw, it's really cool. If you catch a fallen pine tree, or any tree I think, fast enough, there's still tension in the roots that are in the ground. And so if you cut it fast enough, when the tension is still there, you'll get to a point where it throws the trunk back up. So I got about to the last 8 feet of it chunked up, and then it just flopped right back up again and refilled the hole, which was kind of cool. And then of course I diced it up from when it was standing up to finish it off. Put all the chunks over here in this wall. So there used to be a little problem with forerunners. People neighboring who lived down there would come blazing up this road, and as opposed to coming this way along that access road, they would just fly right through here onto the Havenwood land and kind of blast down there, which was less than thrilling for all of us. So that's where this wall essentially started. I didn't originally intend for it to run the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of yards that it runs, but this is where it started, to make sure it was very clear that this is a non-motorized area. Everyone is then, with a motorized vehicle, is diverted in that direction. Here's a super cool tree. I love these beech trees. This tree started to fall years ago, stayed alive, and then the top of it rotted out, and then the branches became the trunks. That's a really cool tree. There are a lot of trees actually like that are really cool like that. I love the trees around here. And then starting here, this entire path up here, from here to the end of the red path, did not exist when I started working on the place. And this was a hard hill to navigate, and it just feels good to be able to walk a perimeter of a property. So I cut these stairs in. I found these. These are cedar fence posts. There used to be a property line that ran down there. And so every few feet there was a cedar fence post still stuck in the ground. The fencing was gone, but the cedar posts were there. So I pulled them out of the ground and cut them up and made them into these stairs. Of course, over time, you can tell the erosion is kind of blending it into a ramp. The stairs are turning into a ramp because they're not the biggest stairs. Ideally, if you're going to make stairs in the woods, you want to use railroad ties. They last forever and they're the right size. But that's what this path is. So I cut this switch back in so that people would more easily be able to walk this beautiful hillside. This hillside also I cleared out this year. It turned out really, really well. And gathered all the brush into big piles like this and kind of cleared out this beautiful open area. And I intentionally let some rotten trees stay to feed the woodpeckers, which I think you can hear by one of my woodpecker friends in the background there. And I left this rotten guy here because he kind of holds the dirt and keeps the erosion from going downhill, you know. So ideally, one day I would come here and I would replace all these stairs with railroad tie stairs. It would make it much easier to walk. But it's still quite nice. It's still fine. Here's a really cool tree too. I don't know exactly what happened with this guy. His trunk used to extend this way, all the way over here, but it got split in a storm. And I don't know what happened with this guy, but it got really wounded. I don't know if that's a lightning strike or if it just split that way, but that's a big wound. And it just kept on living. It's doing great. It's doing really great. It's another really cool, cool tree. I like those beech trees a lot. Pine tree fell here also last year. You can tell where the root ball rips up when the pine trees fall, right? It rips out of the ground there, and it fell perfect. It fell in a line all the way up there, just whoom, right in this hole. Killed almost nothing. Didn't really even harm any of the saplings. I chunked it up. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And so I put all the brush on top of this pile. There was another root ball there from a fallen tree. And some of the brush I added here. And then I connected it with this kind of serpentine figure. I thought it looked nice. And that's not really advantageous to the animals, but it will stop erosion, and it will one day rot and turn into a little berm. And I think it looks nice. So that's what that is. And this is a perfect example of what happens when the pines blow down. This is what happens. They rip the roots out of the ground, and then, in this case, they sit there. This would be a pretty tricky. I was going to cut this. This would be a pretty tricky cut because of all the tension on it, but it's not really doing any harm. So I left it there. Property line is right here, so this is technically on the neighbor's property. This corner here to the right was so beautiful with all of its ferns, which you can see through there, all lit up, and it was just covered with downed trees. So even though it's not on the Havenwood property, I did go ahead and clean it up, and I made that critter house and that critter house to kind of, this corner opens up with all those beautiful ferns. This is just a lovely little glen, really nice, and now it really can be appreciated, when you walk the path this far. And so now we come to the end of, essentially the end of the red path. Now, at this intersection, the red path joins the spring path, and they both continue to the right and follow a creek down that way and around the corner to a lake and the main house. That portion of the red path I'll do on the spring loop video. And this is the spring here. There's 7 springs that feed the lake, and this is the main spring that feeds the lake. And there used to be an old log cabin right up there, and they would walk down this hill and get their water from this spring. But that is the end of the Red Path commentary. Hope you enjoyed it. Any questions, put them in the comment box below or send me an email, rediscoveringpeace99@protonmail.com, and I will answer them as best I can. But now I'm going to turn off the video and then turn it back on again and walk the same path in silence in return. All right, so enjoy. Bye, friends.